In this video, I wanted to show you how I made this clamp rack. The good news is it's really easy to make and you don't need a lot of tools to make it. Check it out. And when I say this is an easy build, I really do mean it. You only need 4 strips of plywood that are 16 inches wide and 48 inches long to make this entire thing. To cut out my pieces, I use my track saw, but you could just as easily use a circular saw with a straight edge to reference, or you could even use a jigsaw, though I'm not sure why you'd do that to yourself. For this entire build, you're only going to be cutting out 2 profiles. One is the backer, the other is the brackets. There's going to be 8 pieces for the brackets, and there's going to be 1 backer. Real simple. Now let's talk about the 8 bracket pieces. In the rest of the video and in the plans, I refer to them as being 16 inches by 16 inches, which they basically are. But you're cutting them out of a 48 inch wide piece of plywood, and 3 of those plus the kerf is more than 48 inches. So they're actually closer to 15 7/8 of an inch by 15 7/8 of an inch. The brackets will use 3 of the 4 16 inch by 48 inch wide pieces we cut out earlier of our piece of plywood. When all is said and done, you're going to need 8 of these pieces cut out that are 16 inches by 16 inches. You're going to end up with a little bit of leftover material, which is roughly equivalent to 1 extra bracket. I strongly recommend you don't throw out this extra piece. Here I'm cutting out the backer board, but if you've been paying attention, you should have already done that, and I only left this in here so that you could make fun of me and learn from the errors of my ways. I don't know why I cut this well after I cut the other pieces. You really should cut the backer before you cut all the brackets. To help lessen the weight of the brackets, I cut them at a 45 and did sort of a tapered cut on them. As you can see here, I marked them up wrong the first time. I wanted to come in 2 inches from the side on one side and then 2 inches from the side on the other side and then connect the lines, but I did it on the wrong side. So pay attention to your markup, it's really important. Lowering the weight of the bracket was just one advantage of cutting the 45. The other was, it just looks better. If you have just a square sticking off the backer board, it would look really silly and you'd probably knock into it all the time. So with the 45-degree cut, it gives you a nicer profile, it's a lighter piece of wood, and it's still strong. It'll hold the clamps just fine. Unfortunately, I realized after making the markups that this would go a lot faster if I made these cuts on the tapering jig. I wouldn't need to make these big long marks, I could just make marks on the ends and line them up with the tapering jig. But I didn't figure that out till after I made the markups, so here we are. If you do plan on using a circular saw with a straight edge, or a track saw, or a jigsaw for these cuts, you will still need to make these markups. They're very simple, it'll go by really quick. You're going to want to make these cuts for all 8 brackets. I'm not going to show you all 8, don't worry, calm down. When you're done, you'll end up with a stack of brackets that looks like this. Here I'm marking up where the brackets will be attached to the backer board. In the plans, I'll include where you need to attach these exactly, but in reality, you don't really need to sweat where these are located because there is plenty of space on the backer board. The only thing that does matter is that you don't put a bracket or clamps in the very center of the board or a ½ an inch from both sides. The reason is this is where your screws will go, and they are spaced out perfectly so that they will attach to 3 studs, assuming your walls are 16 inches on center. So I've got some bad news. I lost a bunch of footage from this project. But the good news is, it was just me cutting dados for a few hours, so it's not a huge loss. If you don't know what a dado is, it's a cut into a piece of wood that's generally wider than the thickness of the blade, but it goes into the wood but not through the wood. And what it does is create a pocket to receive another piece of wood, and this is beneficial because you get more surface area for the wood glue to go on, and it creates a very strong joint. And that's what I'm using to attach the brackets to the backer board for the clamp rack. So because I don't have any footage of me cutting the dados, I will link a video that my friend Bao over at Design Craft made for a jig to cut dados. There's a lot of ways to cut dados. On a router, on a table saw. Okay, those are the only ways. But I did mine on a router. I have a 3/4 inch plywood dado bit. Those are not very expensive, and I use mine all the time, so that's a great option. Obviously, the traditional option is on a table saw, and that's just in the United States though, because in
Europe, you cannot use dado stacks. I won't go into explaining why that's the case because I don't know that answer, but Google does, so go find out.
So now that you've learned how to cut a dado, you're good to go. And realistically, if you're making this clamp rack for your shop, you probably already either know how to cut a dado or you've cut a million dados in your life. So it's not really a huge loss not being able to watch footage of me cutting it. As you can see here, my dados are already cut. The brackets are on the other side of the backer panel. They're dry fit in. What I'm doing here is I'm transposing the marks from the front of the backer board to the back of the backer board. These marks are going to tell me where my screws are going to go in from the back into the brackets. The next thing I did was clamp spacers in between the front of the brackets. This kept everything in line while I drilled the holes for the screws and got ready for the glue up. I pre-drilled and countersunk all the holes for the screws that would go through the backer board into the brackets. I was, however, concerned that the 2.5 inch long screws I was using would delaminate the plywood in the brackets, so I came back with a drill bit and I drilled out the holes a little deeper. Keep in mind that the screws aren't actually what's holding the brackets to the backer board. That's what the glue is going to be used for. The screws are going to act as more of a clamp to hold them in place while the glue dries. The glue up for this is very straightforward. You just want to make sure that you get plenty of coverage inside the dado with the wood glue. This maximizes the surface coverage in the joint when you attach the bracket into the dado. Once the glue was spread out, I placed the bracket into the dado, and once it was in place, I flipped the bracket up so I could start screwing it off. So on the last shot, you could see that the bracket wasn't entirely in the dado, and that's kind of the magic of the screws here. You really do want to get them in there as best you can, but the screws are going to pull them in and cinch it up really tight. That's the other reason why I put the spacers in the front, because you're kind of pulling in different directions and it's a lot of different forces that can make this thing go out of place. So you really want to do everything you can to get it squared up when you're attaching it. The rest is just kind of rinse and repeat. You're just going to be gluing and screwing and attaching the brackets. You're going to do it with all these for all 8 of them. And then before you know it, you're done. It goes pretty quick. After the glue dries, all that's left is to attach it to the wall. I've never had any luck with a stud finder. They always only work on me. So I've always used a rare earth magnet to find my studs. And this is assuming that the drywaller who hung the drywall actually found the studs, but basically the magnet helps you find where the screws or nails are that were used to put the drywall up. And that usually can give you a good idea where everything's at. So the clamp rack isn't super heavy, but it's also not super light. And I like to put up this temporary cleat so that I can lean the clamp rack up against that while I'm screwing everything off. Also, I chose this height by measuring my tallest clamp. It would have been a huge bummer to put this thing up on the wall, only to find out that my tallest clamp drags on the ground. So I measured my tallest clamp to see how much clearance I need, and I set everything appropriately. After getting everything screwed in, all that was left was to remove the cleat that I used to hold everything up while I was screwing it in. And before I throw it back over to myself and do the outro, here's a couple quick beauty shots of the clamp rack in action. It really does work really well.
I really hope you enjoyed this build, and I really hope this helps you out. I obviously use this clamp rack every single day. It's got all my parallels and my pipe clamps in it, and it's just been a huge add for my shop, and I know it would be a huge add for your shop as well. If this video did help you out, I'd really appreciate it if you gave me a thumbs up and if you hit that subscribe button. Also, the notification bell helps me out too. And if you have any comments or questions, please let me know down below in the comment section, and thank you for stopping by.